This is Rudy Ayala with Spearhead Pest Control in Ventura, California, and you are listening to the world's #1 pest control training podcast, the Pest Geek Podcast with Frank Hernandez.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek Podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek Podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. I am your host, Frank Hernandez, here every day discussing all things pest. And I want to remind everybody to join the Pest Geek Society. Join the revolution of what's happening in the pest control industry. Join us on Facebook, Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group. We're also on Twitter. We're on YouTube, PestGeekPodcast.com. Join us. Join in on the conversation. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you need to be more successful. Contribute, engage. And now here's Jeff McGovern with today's topic.
Well, thank you, Frank. This is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach. And today, as I have the last few sessions on Pest Geek Podcast, I'm coming to you from the cab of my Ford Transit Connect, rocketing down the highway. And yes, I've got my seatbelt on, and yes, I'm doing this hands-free. So for any of you that think he shouldn't be messing with a phone, he's not. He's doing it hands-free. But at any rate, what I wanted to look at today is a little bit regarding ant control. I got a question about this earlier in the week. Somebody had called me because I think they had seen something we had done earlier with regard to a training class. And I thought, you know what, just talking about it for a few minutes, I can go over some things about the ant problems I've run into and how we've ultimately solved them, because I think there's a tendency to maybe spray them away, which in some cases is not a good idea. And in fact, I've recently met a fine young couple with a beautiful piece of property, and they wanted things containerized. They didn't want materials spread all over the place. They wanted a more targeted approach, and they certainly didn't want anything sprayed around the outside of their house. They felt that was an issue. But at any rate, in looking at ant problems, obviously the first thing we have to do is identify the ant. And there are a tremendous number of resources out there to do that. For those of you that have the NPMA guide on your phone, that's a handy system to have. You can also look at the PCT guides that have been out there over the years. The ant control guide they have is great with identification and such. You can go through and key the insect, provided you have enough magnification to see the features of the body itself. Now, a simple hand lens will do that, and frankly, a lot of new cell phones will do a really nice job of expanding that image so you can get a good look at the insect and key it out properly. But once you identify the ant, then you can begin the process necessary to deal with it at your client's location and frankly, make it go away. Because that's why people pay us. They want things to be gone. Well, once you've done the investigation and figured out what the insect is, try and understand what the pattern might be. And I had a situation recently at the house we have in North Florida, and that we had a huge problem with crazy ants on the second floor. And yeah, I did mess with them a bit. I kind of moved things around, wanted to see where they were going, and all this kind of thing. And, I thought, instead of spraying them or something like that, why don't we go ahead and see what happens? Can we draw the insects out with bait? And so I went ahead outside and I examined the exterior of the house, and I found out where they were trailing up to that second floor. And in this particular case, what they were doing is going up a cable line on the outside of the house. Thought, aha, now I know what the pathway is. So in that zone, once I identified that particular penetration zone, I took an IBS bait station from VM Products. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with VM Products, they make a lot of rodent control stations, some very innovative equipment, as well as insect and fly stations, and they're exclusively available through Univar. But at any rate, I took one of the IBS stations, I opened it up, and inside I built a buffet for ants. In other words, I took a variety of products, materials that we had on hand, and I put them inside of that box in the little trays, and in some of the deep trays I added liquid. And I positioned that box in the zone where the ants were moving. I didn't shove it in their face. I put it out in such a fashion they would encounter it, but I didn't want to ram it into their face because sometimes that causes an issue. But at any rate, I put it out, and I observed it for a few minutes, and within probably 5 minutes, ants were examining that station and interfacing with the product. I closed it up. I said, I'm going to check this tomorrow and see what happens. I came out the next morning and popped that box open. Holy cow, every drop of the liquid bait that I had put in there was gone. Now, in that particular case, I used the Gourmet Liquid Ant Bait. I like that product. I have good luck with it, and it's what I had on hand. Obviously, the ants agreed with me. So they'd obliterated the liquid bait. I mean, it was done. It was gone. They had also gotten into the Nivan that I had in there. We're messing with that. And we had put some gel bait in as well. But, they weren't as interested in that gel for one reason or another in that particular case. So I went ahead, refreshed that box, a little bit more investigation in the zone, and I found next to a brick pier where the insects were coming up and down in that zone, and I introduced a full Antopia station from the same folks that make the Gourmet Liquid Ant Bait, and I filled it. Went ahead, came back the next morning, the entire liquid station was empty. Now, there's a lesson here, because in a lot of cases, we go ahead and do our ant work, and we do our service, we put out our baits, and we come back in 3 months. Well, if I had done that, just put it out and walked away, I probably wouldn't have gotten one iota of control in that zone. But by going back and checking my placements, I knew what they wanted, I found out they devoured it, and so you know what, that next day I replaced it again, filled up on product. We know what was happening. The ants on the second floor left. They vacated. They simply stopped going up and down the side of the house because for one reason or another, they discovered a new food source, and it was what I was giving them. So I continued that process, stretching out my visits on it a little bit until there was simply no more feeding in that zone. There were also no more ants in that zone. So I was able to get control of those insects without spraying any pesticides at all, and I used measured amounts of bait materials, accepting some and rejecting others they didn't want, and therefore I was able to deal with the problem. Now, I've seen situations like this happen before, and I'll give you another quick example. We were looking at a hospital in the deep south that had a problem with ants on the 6th floor. And so I had traveled out to visit the facility. I got to the facility and I simply asked, where was the last place you saw the ants? Because, man, this is a great big place, and you don't always have time to tear the whole thing apart. They took me upstairs to the 6th floor. They walked me into the areas where they were seen, and the attendant simply pointed at the windowsill areas and said, right there, that's where we saw them. So I started looking around and examining some things. Now, mind you, I'm not an entomologist, and I do not play one on TV. So I gathered up my samples, I opened up my handy-dandy PCT ant guide, and I flipped through the pages. I looked at what I had in my hands with a hand lens, and you know what? I had fire ants on the 6th floor. Aha! So I went back downstairs, and this was a beautifully landscaped facility. facility. Thick, rich, lush grass, beautiful planted areas, and all around the building there were these notches with low growth, kind of like maybe creating a miniature jungle canopy right next to the building with beautiful exotic plants. Well, I started examining some of those zones because when I got outside, I went, wait a minute, what's above this area with the beautiful exotic plants? Well, if I looked up, there I go, 6 floors in the air with the rooms that were being bothered. So we did some additional investigation, and there were no fire ant mounds in the lawn areas at all. In fact, they told me that they regularly had the lawns treated and sprayed to keep insects down. Well, it looked like what was happening was that the ants went, you know what, I'm not going to be out there on the lawn, but nobody is bothering me in this lush, exotic jungle that I'm living in. So what we did was we took fire ant bait and we didn't throw it on top of the jungle. Because you know what? It would never gotten past the tree canopy. We pulled things back and moved things around and carefully distributed the bait product underneath that upper cover. And what happened? The ants pulled back. The ants pulled into those zones. They actually came down the side of the building. They started feeding on the product we had left. And we got control. And we did it without hosing anything down. And that incident was the single incident that caused me to rethink how I work with ants now. Can I pull those insects out? And once I pull them out, maybe I've got bait stations for ants around the building initially. But as I proceed with my service profile, maybe I pull those stations back to other planted areas on the property and start introducing things away and controlling the ants in that fashion. I had an incident like that in Central Florida, where I had a property that my daughter had her wedding event at. The one they do before the wedding, and they bring everybody in and they smack each other in the back and go, congratulations, you're getting married. Well, we went there. They had an ant problem, and it was not a large facility, but it was meant for outdoor, indoor events for parties. And we were able to pull the ants away from the building, pull them out, and shove them out by the fence line, and keep them fat, dumb, and happy eating out there. And we did that in a very short period of time. I'm talking maybe a month. But if you look at control measures in that fashion, it's a little different than just going out and hosing the building down. Because what we were doing was actually destroying the source of the issue by going after the ants and letting them take the product home and dropping the populations in those colonies, which gave us better control. So in a nutshell, you set up a buffet. Once you figure out what's going on, set up the buffet, come back the next day and find out what the heck they're eating, and pay no attention to brand or anything else. You need to check a lot of different products. So purchase a buffet of products. Find what really works for you. All the manufacturers make superb materials, and I like all of them at one time or another. But you need to find the one that works for you, and then when you do, introduce that to the situation, and you're going to get the control you need. You'll have a very satisfied client, and you won't be willy-nilly throwing product all over the place. And the cool thing is, if you approach it in this manner, you're going to look incredibly professional, because you're using precision, you're using accuracy, and you're getting the results necessary to protect your client. And so with that, this is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach, signing off again this week. And Frank, I will turn it back to you, sir. Y'all take care.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.